does this through maintaining your blood pressure. So your body loses water in 4 different ways. So the 4 ways that this happens are evaporation from respiration, evaporation from your skin, excretion from the kidneys, and excretion from your large intestine. So when the body is at rest, 30% of your water loss comes from the skin and respiration, 5% comes from sweat when you're resting, 60% of your water loss during rest is excretion from your kidneys, and then 5% is excretion from the large intestine. When you're exercising though, 90% of your water loss will come from sweat, and the remaining 10% of your water loss will come from respiration during exercise. So a commonly asked question is then what level of water intake should I be maintaining if I want to be properly hydrated? So normal hydration can be a wide range of intakes based on a variety of factors, but a typical rule of thumb for the average person is to try and drink 8 glasses of water a day. But the dietary reference intake for an adequate intake for water when it comes to men and women who are aged 19 to 30 years old is 3.7 liters for men and 2.7 liters for women. Because hydration has a wide range of intakes though, based on factors, it is possible to consume less than the recommended 3.7 liters for men and 2.7 liters for women, and still maintain a good hydration level based on your individual health. Naturally, individuals who are more physically active are going to require a higher daily water intake than individuals who are primarily sedentary. So, dehydration in athletes. Athletes commonly lose 1 to 6% of their total body water when exercising vigorously for an extended period of time. So this is really important because, as I mentioned earlier, 9 to 12% of a loss in total body water can be fatal. So athletes who exercise vigorously for an extended period of time, they come really close to that if they reach the 6%. So hydration is very important for them. Water loss is accelerated during exercise. So exercise causes an increase in body temperature, and this causes your body to sweat as it attempts to avoid overheating. Individuals are typically able to expel this heat based on their ability to both form and evaporate sweat. Because everyone does lose fluids at different rates based on multiple factors like height and weight, environment, and then personal health history. That's why there's not a set adequate intake for water when it comes to athletes. So symptoms of dehydration, common and less concerning symptoms of dehydration can include extreme thirst, less frequent urination, dark colored urine, fatigue, dizziness, and confusion. And the more severe symptoms of dehydration can include really dry skin, dizziness, a very rapid heartbeat, rapid breathing, sunken eyes, really sleepy, a lack of energy, confusion, irritability, and then fainting. So the way that dehydration leads to a decrease in sport performance is that when an athlete is exercising and begins sweating, they have an increased water loss, since 90% of the water loss is now occurring from sweat as opposed to the 5% water loss that was occurring from sweat when they were resting. So several things begin to happen if they don't have adequate replacement of those fluids that are now being lost after they've begun exercising. So the first thing that happens is the increased fluid loss. This increase in fluid loss will begin to decrease plasma volume. And then a decrease in plasma volume turns around and decreases the blood pressure. So then a decrease in blood pressure leads to a reduction in both blood flow to the skin as well as a reduction in blood flow to the muscles. So as an attempt to overcome the lack of blood flow, your heart rate increases since not as much blood is making it to the skin, your body isn't able to dispel heat through dissipation in the way that it's used to, so that is also reduced. So overall, it leads to an individual with an elevated heart rate and an elevated body temperature. So there's one study that was performed to test the effects of dehydration on sport performance. This study tested distance runners, and these distance runners were given a diuretic to decrease their body weight by approximately 2% to test the effects of dehydration on their performance. The runners in this particular study were tested on an outdoor track, and these runners ran distances of 1,500 meters, 5,000 meters, and 10,000 meters while they were being timed. So the dehydration that these runners experienced as a result of the diuretic for this study led to plasma volume decreases of 10 to 12%. And so after the study was over, findings found that average VO2 max for the runners did not change between hydrated and dehydrated trials. However, the mean running velocity decreased in the 1,500 meter run by 3%, and the mean running velocity decreased in the 5,000 meter run and 10,000 meter run by more than 6%. So what these decreases show us is that the longer the duration of exercise, there's going to be a greater decline in performance for that same level of dehydration. When it comes to this particular study, some other factors that played into the results are that this study happened in an environment where there was cold weather or cooler weather. So what this tells us is that environments with greater levels, so higher temperatures, greater levels of humidity, and greater levels of radiation, athletes exercising in those kind of environments should expect higher levels of decline in the performance for that specific level of dehydration. So when talking about dehydration, it's important to mention that dehydration doesn't only refer to water in your body. Electrolytes also play a major role when it comes to your body's overall hydration. So while sweat is 99% water, it also contains sodium, chloride, potassium, magnesium, and calcium. The electrolytes of an individual's sweat will vary though, and this can vary based on genetics, the rate at which the individual is sweating, the state of that individual's training, and it will also vary based on the state of heat acclimatization that individual athlete is in. So your body loses more water than electrolytes through sweating, but what's been found is that during exercise, sweat contains large amounts of sodium and chloride. So this lowers the body's content of sodium and chloride by about 5% and 7%. At the same time, though, your body doesn't lose as much potassium, calcium, and magnesium. So your body only loses about 1% of the content of those three, as opposed to how much it loses of sodium and chloride. So what this does, in reference to dehydration, is this causes an increase in the osmotic pressure of your body's fluids as your electrolyte levels become more concentrated. And so the only way to return the concentration of the electrolytes in your body to normal levels is through replacing body water that was lost, because this will dilute the concentrations to the normal levels that they were beforehand. So a lot of people identify the thirst mechanism as how your body communicates the fact that it needs you to drink water, or as an indication of dehydration, which is technically true, but what a lot of people don't realize or fail to remember is that your thirst mechanism doesn't kick in until you're already dehydrated. So thirst is regulated by osmoreceptors in your hypothalamus. So there's a threshold value for the osmolarity of plasma, and when that threshold value is reached, that's when the signals go off for the thirst mechanism. So your thirst mechanism doesn't go off until well after you are already dehydrated. So even while you're dehydrated, it's really, really common for people to only become thirsty at intervals throughout the day. And so this leads to a lot of people remaining dehydrated even after their thirst mechanism has already kicked in, because they'll listen to their thirst mechanism and they'll drink a little bit of water, but at the same time they're not intaking enough to replace the water loss that has already occurred. And so their water loss doesn't get replenished to the full extent, but their thirst mechanism is temporarily turned off. And so they go about their day, and a little while later, the thirst mechanism will kick back in, saying, hey, I'm still dehydrated. So they'll drink a little bit more water until that turns off again. But even throughout all of this, they're not actually getting back to a good level of hydration. They're just drinking enough fluids to turn off their thirst mechanism, but they are remaining dehydrated. So there's also benefits of intaking fluid while you are exercising. So besides just a minimization of dehydration, intaking fluid while you're exercising will also lead to a minimization of increases in body temperature. It minimizes the stress on the cardiovascular system while exercising, and it minimizes declines in sports performance during exercise. Another thing that they found is that when you are drinking during exercise or after exercise, cool fluids are better than warmer fluids at lowering your overall body temperature, because when you drink a cool fluid, the deep body heat is used to warm the fluid that you're intaking to your body's temperature. So it's pulling out a deeper body heat that's not usually addressed when hydrating. So that's really important. So the American College of Sports Medicine, in conjunction with the American Dietetic Association and the Dietitians of Canada, each of these places have published their own guidelines for adequate fluid intake. And these guidelines are for before, during, and after an exercise bout. So this is a compilation of key recommendations from all three of these resources as listed in the Physiology of Sport and Exercise. So it is recommended that 2 hours before beginning exercise, athletes should consume between 14 to 22 ounces of fluid. While exercising, athletes should drink a substantial amount of fluid to maintain levels so that their fluid losses don't drop more than 2% of their body weight. After exercise, athletes should be consuming enough fluid to completely replace sweat losses that occurred during the exercise bout. When an intense exercise event lasts longer than 1 hour, it's recommended to intake sports drinks that contain 4 to 8% carbohydrate concentration and 0.5 to 0.7 grams per liters of sodium concentrations. It's also recommended that an athlete should intake sodium through food or drinks when they are trying to recover from an intense exercise bout. This has been proven to positively assist in the body's rehydration process following intense exercise. So there's also something that can occur called hyponatremia. So hyponatremia is defined as serum sodium concentration that is less than the normal range. So the normal range for serum sodium concentration is 135 to 145 millimoles per liters. So this happens when sodium concentration is diluted through consuming too much fluid that doesn't contain enough sodium. Symptoms of hyponatremia don't appear until the levels have already dropped below 130 millimoles per liters. So these initial symptoms can include bloating, puffiness, nausea, vomiting, and headaches. Hyponatremia can turn really dangerous really fast, and as it gets more and more severe, there can be cerebral edema. So cerebral edema is the swelling of your brain, and this is really serious, and that can lead to confusion, disorientation, agitation, seizures, pulmonary edema, coma, and death. The thing with hyponatremia, though, is that there aren't a lot of cases reported because it is a very rare thing to experience. So there's not a lot of data in order to come up with specifically how much of a ratio between sodium and water that needs to be intaken enough to balance this in a way that doesn't cause hyponatremia. But it's really rare to experience. There's been a couple case studies done that were done on like marathon runners who collapsed, and then like following reports, it showed that they had been experiencing hyponatremia. So this doesn't happen except for in really extreme cases with super intense, super long exercise bouts and not enough sodium intake with water intake. And so the sodium has been diluted in a way that's dangerous for them. So the references that I used for this were Physiology of Sport and Exercise, and also the dietary reference intakes for water, potassium, sodium, chloride, and sulfate. Thank you guys so much.